So good morning, everybody. I'm afraid, going to use a few paper notes just to make sure I stay on topic. I know I can ramble on, so Sam's going to keep me on point. But we're really looking forward to sharing this new white paper, which is full of new learnings, and we've read a lot of reports in the process. So what was the question that the Commercial Leadership Group gave us? It was, how can agencies improve their commercial performance with pricing? And we probably need to check. We've got our deck up actually here. There we go. That's the first one. So bearing in mind that this is not a new question, I mean, it's certainly, though, a pressing one, and one I think those of you that have been coming every year know that we've addressed it in one perspective or another every year, certainly for the last 3 that I've been coming. So we started off by commissioning some research from the Manifesto Group. And what was different this time is we specifically asked them to look outside of this industry, at industries who are or who have faced similar challenges to us, so that what we could do was learn from those and apply that new thinking to our own industry. Now this slide, I think, is a very interesting one, and it proves and it demonstrates just how intensified the whole discussion around pricing in the last decade has become. You know, from the IPA's Magic and Logic paper back in 2006, which I certainly remember when I was a client, to the last kind of 2 or 3 years where you've got McKinsey's, Bain, you've got Michael Farmer, all of those writing many, many papers on this whole subject, this whole conundrum and frustration that we feel clients have and agencies have, which is how do we price our services. So what we're trying to do is bring together the research that the Manifesto Group undertook and also reading all of these papers. How can we take the best bits of everything to find a way of using all of this in a very practical way to improve commercial success? So I'm going to hand over to Sam to take you through some of the key learnings in that research before I take you through the sort of model that we ended up developing through it.
Thank you.
Shall I sit down and leave you?
Yeah, take a seat.
Creep.
So you can see from this chart, obviously, that the conversation around price has been going on for a long time, but as Janet said, it's something that has intensified more recently. And to give a sense of why that might be, I borrowed a slide from another IPA research project about the changing nature of the industry. And I think what this demonstrates is a couple of things. One, that the nature of the services being provided in the agency space has changed dramatically. And then the other thing, alongside that, the types of businesses providing those services has changed dramatically as well. So we see kind of big tech platforms and publishers coming in, providing solutions at scale at one end, and the big consultancies coming in with their advisory services at the other, and then lots of different specialists kind of popping up in the middle. And what's interesting about this is with all of these new different types of competitors, they've brought new business models to the industry, and with that they've brought new pricing models as well, which I think is one of the things that's been particularly disruptive. So what we did is we spoke to buyers, sellers, and then what we called the related world. So we spoke to people that buy agency services, the sellers of those services, and then when we talk about the related world, we looked at the kind of adjacent categories and what's happening out there as well. So we wanted to make sure that we understood what's happening in the agency space now and how services are being sold and priced. What's kind of happening one step removed from that, the types of models that people are perhaps experimenting with on the fringes of the industry. And then a step again outside of that, what are people doing in other categories that we could learn from? So one of the most interesting things that we learned was actually the type of business delivering the services has less to do with how it's priced. So I think we have an idea in our heads that certain types of industries use certain types of pricing. And we kind of found that not to be true. So we had a really interesting conversation with a law firm quite early on where they talked about how they priced their ideas differently from their advisory services, different from the products that they sold. Which is an interesting perspective from a law firm, but we actually saw it across lots of different places. And so there was a real sense that there were lots of different services being sold to lots of different people by lots of different types of businesses using different pricing models, but it was actually the kind of what was being sold in the middle was the thing that was most definitive of the pricing techniques that were being used. And those businesses were very comfortable bundling different types of pricing methodologies together to the same clients based on doing different services for them. The thing that underpinned this was actually the type of value. So different services represent different types of values to clients, from the business-defining idea or strategy through to the kind of specialist expertise that sits within agencies, down to kind of quality execution. And quality execution at scale is exactly where those big tech platforms have come in with kind of productized, standardized solutions. And then, as we said earlier, you've got the kind of consultants and their advisory services at the top. So those different types of value, they are all valuable. And actually, we heard that earlier as well. All of them have value. They just represent different types of value. And clients have an appreciation that there are different types of value. And they don't just expect the price tag to change. They're quite comfortable with the way things are being priced changing to reflect that type of value as well. So this starts to become about aligning the activities and the value with the way that you price them. So one of the things that we did when we were doing this research is we looked at all of the different ways that we saw, all of the different pricing tactics and methodologies, gathered them together, defined them, described them, looked at the pros and cons for agencies, and we've packaged all of that up, and that's something that you'll get in the report that you receive today for free. You can do signed copies for £5. We also looked at how you can categorize those different types of pricing. So the kind of more input-based pricing, time and materials, deliverables or outputs versus results or outcomes. And we initially called them inputs, outputs and outcomes, but it got really confusing really quickly. So we've gone back to time and materials, outputs and results to help navigate this. So there are different ways, different groups of pricing techniques, which actually do map to the different types of value that you're delivering as well. And Janet's going to come on to talk about that a little bit more in a minute. Hopefully this in itself is valuable to you guys because you get a sense of the different options and how appropriate they might be. But what it actually also does is serve to highlight the complexity of the situation and how difficult it might be to end up finding the right pricing solution. So what we wanted to make sure that we did out of this was actually create something that you guys could use to navigate your way through this to the right solutions. So we've looked at the 6 factors that are the most important things for agencies to understand and assess about their situation in order to find their way to the right pricing solutions. And Janet is going to talk you through those 6 factors.
Here we go. Some of this is going to seem very obvious, I think. So I really want to make sure that I link it back to what we found in the research and why these factors we determined actually could be the biggest difference to how you choose your final pricing solution. So the first one maybe is incredibly obvious. It's the client need question. And we've actually already heard this morning about getting underneath the need and really understanding what the need is really important. And so what we're not talking about here is actually capturing the scope of work necessarily, which is typically in an agency quite often where we start. And in a way, we're already starting at an execution point rather than really trying to get back and behind what is the business need that the subsequent work is going to deliver on. And that you really need to find the words and the numbers that mean you can document what that need is. And this is really critical if you're going to be able to demonstrate later what Lisa said, which is what value have we delivered at the end? Because ultimately the clients are really interested in the value that your ideas and your work are generating. So if you haven't captured the real business commercial need at the beginning really clearly and defined it, your ability to evaluate what you're doing later gets harder and harder. And then what we did also find is that the consultancy companies and the technology companies are brilliant at this. And certainly consultancies very quickly demonstrate to clients how they will return the investment in the consultant's fee multiple times. And I'm not talking 2 or 3 times, I'm talking 10 or more times. And they keep it in their language and their vocabulary throughout the project. And as Lita said, and Mark asked the question, how can you help improve this value conversation? They are always checking in with the client on the results of the work and how it's impacting the client's business. And this is kind of a new language that we need to acquire in our industry. So it's really important that you understand what the client needs are and what the value of your work is if you can address them. You know, you've got to get that equation in place. And then you can price to reflect the value that your work's going to generate. Again, this might seem obvious. What is your offering? What's really your core offering? Because what we found in the research is that agency types and classifications, such as we're a digital agency, we're a social media agency, are not really very useful in defining what it is you do. Because in this kind of complicated, complex world where there's lots and lots of new entrants, everybody does a bit of digital, does a bit of social. You know, these things aren't differentiators anymore. They're not really describing what you do. Quite often they're just describing channels. And if we look at what other industries have been very good at doing, they've been very good at sort of evolving their proposition and found ways to package and describe what it is they do differently. This is probably the hardest one, I think, for us to kind of switch and change to. But by describing what we do using the language of products and services, it actually opens us up to have many more opportunities to price in different ways. And it will help us really shift from pricing by the hour to pricing the products and the services based on the value that they generate for the clients. So it's a really critical factor that we need to think about differently. So you may be a highly strategic agency delivering strategy, but how can you package that up? You probably have lots of different ways that you deliver that strategic knowledge, and maybe packaging it up differently is a different way to offer the client different price points or different ways to deliver and describe those things. And certainly the big tech companies or the in-housing agencies have effectively productized a lot of these things and created unit prices, which means, you know, the price moves based on how many of these things the client's purchasing from them at any time. And it clearly introduces different risks and opportunities, but it's completely started to move it away from hours. So make sure you understand the value again of those activities. And maybe look at those activities today and ask yourself, what value do they generate for the client? And does that line up with the value that you're generating today? Now, that's a nice segue to value. And we've heard a lot about value attribution today. Nigel mentioned it this morning. What's important in this one and why? The research showed that the importance of linking measurement to the value that you generate for any project or the long-term relationship is critical. And again, consultancies and technology companies make this link all the time, and it's part of their language. So you need to develop 2 or 3 or even 1 KPI that you're going to use to help measure and evaluate the value that you generate. Now, this could just be a revenue or a number of clicks or whatever it is, market share, but we found it could also be an efficiency measure. Help me, agency, come up with a more efficient way to do this. That's a very measurable objective or KPI. And actually, it could lead to you developing a new way to deliver something, which could be more efficient for you and for the client. So that, again, a real win-win. It doesn't just have to be sales and consumer-facing things. But make sure, if you're linking any of these to performance-based remuneration, make sure, 1, it is measurable, and 2, that you really know how you're going to measure it and that there's a mechanism going to be put in place to capture that information. Risk. This was a really interesting area. There are 2 things. For charging models, new charging models to really work, there needs to be a capacity to take risks. And I've just realised there's sort of something in these charts that I'm omitted to kind of describe to you. There's an outer ring, an inner ring, and a middle ring. And you'll see that, you know, we've used some adjectives to describe what these different rings mean. And the outer ring is potentially, you know, certainly on risk, that there's a risk-taking culture. And the middle ring is where, you know, you may be averse to taking risks. And these rings, again, influence your ability to price differently. And we're going to bring this to life in a minute to help you understand these different rings, because this is when this sort of methodology goes a bit three-dimensional. But if you can be ready to take more risk, there is potentially a significantly greater upside in your pricing and your profitability. But you need to be measured about it. You know, when will you take risk? When will you not take risk? So understanding what your agency's capacity to take risk is really important. Have you ever sat down as an agency and answered that question? How much risk are we going to take? Sam and I were talking about this again this morning, and actually we realised that in agency lands today, we take a lot of risk. Think about how much you invest in pitching a new business and what maybe your hit rate is. So it isn't that we're not taking risks. Where are we taking them, and how much are those risks costing us? And how might we take those risks differently, or choose which clients or opportunities we're going to take more risks with and where we're not going to? But it might help free up your pricing strategy to be a bit more open and a bit more flexible. Relationships. You know, on the outer ring here, you've got the strategic lead, in the middle, the decision maker, and in the middle, just an influencer. Who is it that you're really working with when you're defining and agreeing pricing? Because the quality and the depth of that relationship that you have will make a significant difference to your ability to price differently. If you're working with the strategic partner at the client, and you're working with that same person and a senior person in your organisation, the chances are you're going to have a bit more flexibility to make different decisions. You are dealing with the decision makers or the people that might take a bit more risk. If you're working with a brand manager who's just got a lot of stuff to get done, it's less likely that you're going to be coming up with innovative pricing models and that actually you need a unit-based price model for certain things. So understand that relationship, and that relationship needs to be a commercial relationship as well as a creative relationship. Lisa again commented on this earlier, you know, does your business lead have commercial skills as well as creativity skills? Because they're selling creativity in many respects, but they're selling business solutions with creativity. You know, we are a creative business. So those individuals who are client-facing need to have both skills. It's critical. Because if you over-index on one or the other, you haven't really got the right combination. So equity maybe and PBR models are more likely to be achievable if the relationship is more at the outer ring here than if it's in the middle ring. Commerciality, I think that's the last one, it is. It's becoming increasingly important, and I think we all know this, to have strong commercial skills throughout the agency organisation now. You know, the research showed us that in tech companies, consultancy companies, commercial skills were recognised as an expertise in themselves, and the staff are really trained. The same's true of clients. We come across procurement experts all of the time. These are commercially trained people that are looking at value as well as price. They're looking about the way we work with each other. How can I help my marketing partners spend this investment wisely and well? How can I make sure I'm spending the right money on the right things in the right way? These are commercial skills. So we have to match our skills to those of our clients and the competition. So building that strength is more important than it's ever been before. It'll also help you develop new ways to price. This same community could be the team that are looking at your different pricing strategies or tactics. They could be the same team that are looking at how do we regularly check in or develop some analytics to make sure we're measuring how effective and the value we're generating for our campaigns are, so that they become a real partner to your client leads. So this is a really key skill, and it needs to be a front seat skill and not a finance back office skill. It's really important. If I think back to my client side experience when I came to agency, I really struggled to understand where the sales force was in agencies. It's a key commercial skill that needs to be up the front with the lead suits and with the lead creatives. It's a commercial language, I think, that will help us protect our products and the value of our creativity. So that's a lot of factors, 6. And you can see now this wheel spinning round and we've introduced 3 different layers to it. So how does it actually maybe work in practice? And you might say, well, I know these things are all important. In reality, all of these factors we know are in play most of the time. And they can change, client by client, project by project. And they can even be different by project for the same client. Whoa. But what is the challenge is how you select the most appropriate pricing method, call it your pricing strategy or your pricing tactic, based on your analysis of these 6 factors, the degrees or levels within each of those factors that exist at that moment in time, with the client for the year or the project in question, and what, therefore, is the most appropriate pricing model for your client and for you that you can agree on. So let's try and, I'm going to ask Sam to start to bring this to life a little bit more, and then we've thought of a few scenarios to help put some sort of reality on the table here.
Yes, thank you. So the model itself represents the 6 things which we would encourage anybody to think about when they think about how they price their products and services. And as Janet said, this works in a fairly simple way if you look at each segment, whether you're more or less risk adverse, whether you're more in an executional space or at a strategic or conceptual space, and you can work your way around this and map your situation to it. So to give a flavour of that then, we've both run agencies. Janet, the ones you ran were frankly bigger and probably better. If you think about the services that you provided, how would you say they mapped to this model?
Okay, now the hard work starts. Right, so I would say 10, 12 years ago when I joined Grey, most of our fees were in the inner circle, so using typically time and materials type pricing models. And we decided quite actively that wasn't going to expand our profitability or our revenue necessarily. And we actually had clients in our ears going, we don't like this methodology. So we started then to evolve new models. So we had one client that started to say, I've got a load of executional stuff. So where are we? You're offering. Most of this stuff is executional. That's what I need you to do. I just need you to get it done. It wasn't transformative. But actually, we were having a conversation with actually quite a senior commercial lead on that business. The lady had actually relatively newly arrived, but she was working really closely with marketing. And we developed then a almost an in-house type model to deliver a lot of that work against a unit rate card for them. It created real clarity around the pricing because we had a unit price. What we had to do was get used to the volume really moving. But once we'd started, we realised it was so much better for us because actually the more work we did could justify more staff. If we didn't need the staff. But actually we built a team. Work didn't go to really senior people sometimes because it didn't need to. But our talent knew, actually, this brief doesn't seem quite right. This isn't an executional thing. This is a bigger idea piece. So it really helped us manage profitability better. And the client felt that we had a unit rate card that reflected the right kind of price for the right time of things. Another one, and I know I've used this example here before, is the life paint model, which was a very different model. It was an idea right on the outer ring that the creatives came up for Volvo. So we were working with strategic leads on the client relationship. And by then we'd developed some more advanced business acumen. And I think the client recognised that the product that the agency came up with was quite entrepreneurial. And we were determined, I think, to find a different way of pricing, because we could have just got paid for our hours or our time, but we didn't feel that reflected the value of the idea. To pick up on your law point, we knew it was worth more. So after a while, and it did take us a while, we ended up realising there was a triangle. There was the client, there was the manufacturer of that product, and there was us. And we ended up with a model where the manufacturer paid us at Grey a commission based on how many of those products were produced and sold. So it was zero risk for them, because if they didn't make the product, they didn't pay us. It was zero risk for the client, because it wasn't costing them anything. But it was a great ongoing benefit for us as an agency, because we can continue to get paid for our IP. But it took us a while to get there. But it's learning and to experiment and to take ideas. So that's two very different examples from my experience in an agency. But Sam, I'm going to turn it around the other way. You have agency and consultancy expertise.
Yeah.
How would you say your experience in the consultancy sector is very different, or is it the same as our pricing approach in agencies?
So when I was running and involved in agencies, I would say we were very much kind of in the middle of this circle. I was pricing time, selling time, looking to try and get people onto retainers, bigger retainers, but ultimately just trying to sell more time to more people. At Manifesto and the way we work now, we don't do that at all. We've completely eschewed that. And there are consultancies that do that. But that's not the relationship that we want to have with our clients, or the type of value that we want to be seen to be delivering. So we exist totally in the sort of middle and the outer rings. Everything is output-based, or in some cases outcome-based. And that actually tends to be with our smaller clients, where we're happy to take a risk on their business or their ideas. Most of our bigger clients, in reality, aren't that capable or have the appetite for taking a risk, and we might not want to be able to do that anyway, because we can't necessarily influence all of those things either. So we would tend to be much more in the output-based ring pretty much all of the time. And I've had to turn down retainers as an example of that, and as a commitment to the way that we price ourselves.
So, I mean, to kick off maybe the Q&A section then, so given that potentially, from the information we gather, agencies are more towards the middle and you're more towards the outer, what would your one piece of advice to an agency be to sort of start to mix up the way they price today?
So I think you can live anywhere in this ring. It's just about finding the right place for the right services, and it's not about as we said earlier, the type of agency that you are. You don't have to price all of your services in a certain way. There will be services that you deliver that sit in different places, and relationships that you have that kind of belong in different places. Here, it comes down to the value at the end of the day. For me, it's all about the value that you can offer for the client, and reflecting that in the way that you do pricing, not just the price, not just trying to charge more, but finding solutions that allow you to reflect value in your pricing.
Cool. So I think this is our last slide before the questions come flying at us, which is really about, I think we believe agencies do have the power to price properly. We just need to make sure that in looking at those factors, we're understanding the value that they give to clients, and the value that the client perceives, I think, most importantly, from all of those different services. And to start with some experimentation, or identify what your most valuable offerings and products and services are, and sort of starting to see how, therefore, you price a bit differently. Are there any questions? We've numbed them, Sam.
Click on it. Oh, here we go.
Oh.
If you want to be...
Oh.
Yeah. So why has our industry always been perceived as less value than banks, lawyers, consultancies, etc.? Question on agencies providing value, consultants, tech workers. Is it predominantly...
Who's going to go? I'm not so sure I agree with the opening statement. I think if I listen to what the CMOs around the world say, they absolutely see value in our creativity as an industry. I think we haven't been really strong at measuring that value and being able to describe that back. And certainly I think Sam said this a bit at the beginning. Prior to all of these new entrants, in a sense, the USP was creativity. And Cannes and the Effies, all of these things were about effectiveness and creativity. The other guys have come in and started to sort of show efficiency, sort of value through efficiencies. I think it's about changing the lens, as Brian said. How do we turn that back into a positive? I think we see it this way, whereas I don't think our clients actually do see it this way. I think they see enormous value in creativity. I think we've been slow to change, and actually we need to develop new ways to change to prove that value, demonstrate that value.
Yeah, and so I think the value question is interesting across the different categories. And you've got that kind of, what I think we call quality execution, that layer there. There's incredible value lives there, which is why huge companies like Adobe and Oracle want to be, and Google want to be part of it. They bring with them different models, both in terms of delivery and pricing, but they're doing things that have kind of always existed in the agency space. They're creating value in a different way through kind of productization and standardization, and taking some of the costs out of it in order to deliver that value for clients. I think at the higher end, it's about focusing on the impact that you can have. And some of these different in terms of lawyers, there's a lot of risk associated with the advice they provide in their highly regulated industries. So you have to kind of select the examples that are more appropriate than others. I think we're out of time now, aren't we?
We're out of time.